Hey, folks, welcome to the latest edition of Move the Needle. We are your co hosts, Lee Grigsby and Jay Wilcox. If you missed, this is our new co host, Jay Wilcox, hailing from Barcelona, yes, via the
hmm
UK. So, quick introduction, Jay, for anyone who may have missed the first episode. You guys can go back. But just real quick, if you could you know let the viewers know what brought your interest to wanting to co-host Move the Needle.
Um, gosh, a million different things, a million different news stories, and um, the very, very weird, wonderful times we're living through right now. My my own life, my own childhood experiences, and friendships, and also because of the a lot of the coaching which I do
Mhm.
puts me in contact with certain circumstances where I see inequalities, and it just fascinates me, irritates me, upsets me, and drives me. I don't. That's it in a nutshell.
I love well that means you are moved to
No,
action to move
no,
the
it's
needle. So yeah.
difficult not to be moved by inequality, anything, bullying. It's just difficult not to be moved viscerally, really, or
Yes.
practically physically. It gets to you.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing, right? We're here with Move the Needle to bring those things to light, but also the challenging and difficult conversations that need to be had, need to be discussed, need to be talked about, but from many perspectives, not just one perspective. It's not just Jay's perspective or not just Lee's perspective. We learn things even as we're talking about, the different subjects that we're going to talk about on each show. Um, so,
That's right.
with that being said, let's get into what we're talking about today. So, we are going to kind of focus on police shootings, and I kind of put this title here with escalation or de-escalation, right? That's really what ends up happening. Situations get escalated far more than they should be when police end up shooting and killing citizens. All right. Um, but Jay, before we do that, I have got an update from our last episode. So, last episode, we talked a lot about the political climate here in the US and what's going on. Well, we talked about Project 2025, and it's this
Yeah. Mm.
ultra conservative playbook that if the Conservative Party were to win the White House again, how they would reshape and reform government and reshape what current life could look like in the US. Well, in between last episode and now, apparently the director of Project 2025 has stepped down. And here's the link for you guys if you want to look further into why he has stepped down. But interestingly enough, and I'll share it here, obviously, um, this was always part of their plan. And so this is interesting the way it's worded. It's you know they had already planned this. They will be effectively ending their policy operations, but it doesn't mean that they're dissolving. They're moving to their next phase. And they're trying to get this in place. So I don't want people to be disillusioned by, oh great, the director's stepping down and now Project 2025 is no more. They've always had a plan in place, and this means that the policies that they want to see enacted from a conservative, an ultra conservative standpoint, they're moving forward with whatever the next phase is for them. So just wanted to give that update. Um, it's an interesting thing that we will continue to follow and see where this upside down U.S. political season is going to take us. So Not entirely sure where that goes. But
No.
so what we wanted to discuss in this episode, um, and I put her name on the screen, Sonia Massey. It was a black woman here in the United States, um, called for help, called 911. Officers got to her apartment, ended up being shot and killed by one of the officers. Um, I will. This is the article where you can read more. I'm not going to go too deeply into what happened. You can find that for yourself. Um, Jay, just first thoughts before we share some videos and some other things about the situation itself, about her murder. Um, but you've gone through the article and we kind of talked about it before, recording. What are your initial thoughts on what happened to Sonia Massey?
Um, Initial thoughts are just that clearly the police officer involved wasn't wasn't following the training protocol that the police made it very clear following this event that
Mhm.
they spend a lot of time working on this, and they've had years and years of practice in the US. Um, but the police officer wasn't following the protocol. The police officer clearly wasn't, from all the information that we've seen, wasn't actually in his right mind at the time of this happening.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, Sonia Massey also a person who needed special attention of anyway.
Mhm.
Um, it was just unfortunate. I don't know. I don't know how. We talked about this recently in terms of first responders and
Mhm.
whether or not they're police officers, armed police officers, are the right people to send out in that type of case, because it felt like a heavy-handed response to
Sure.
a case from specifically from from Sonia Massey, from Miss Massey in this case,
Mhm.
and it was a terrible tragedy the way the whole thing unfurled.
Yes.
Again, miscommunication, a lot of miscommunication. Obviously, coming from a European point of view, it always seems very uncomfortable that police uh, carry weapons on them, and it feels, and I have to say this coming from my perspective over here, the other side of the Atlantic, you
Sure.
read these stories, you see these stories, and it's like another police shooting, and it's it's just the terrible thing is you get this feeling, another police shooting. And it's terrible that there should be this horror. I should feel horror that there's even one police shooting, but it's just
Right.
like another police shooting. Um, the fact is, I still don't really understand why all the police carry guns. I still don't really understand why they're everybody's walking around carrying guns anyway.
Really? Right. Well, no, I'm not carrying a gun. I'm not walking. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But yes, I agree with you too. Obviously, being here in the states, we and being a black man, we feel another one. Right? What has to happen for what can you say? What can you do? Where is the bottom of when this becomes enough? Right? But like to your point that we were talking about first responders, are we? And yes, I'm well aware. I have family members and close friends who are police officers, and I'm very aware that they receive de-escalation training and receive sensitivity training, if you will. But are we doing a disservice to emergency and first responders, especially like you in Sonia Massey's case, who has dealt with some mental health issues. Are we doing a disservice to our first responders by sending them into situations that they may not actually be equipped for? That's also something that needs to be looked at. We
Yeah.
cannot keep putting band-aids on a flesh wound that's continually bleeding, right? We have to go to the source of the problem to try to, stop the vein from bleeding from there. We can't just keep covering it over. It's not just about police reform, or it's not just about, what happens on the situation, or on the scene of situations. How do we fundamentally, change the first responder that goes there? I understand that, her call was, she thought there was someone in her house or around
Yeah.
her property.
An
So I can
intruder.
understand why the police would be called there. But then maybe the next step should have been, okay, they found no evidence of an intruder. And even when they opened the door for her, maybe their next call should have been to a different professional to then come out to have that conversation with Sonia Massey about, what did you see? What, maybe that's the next step. Who knows?
Some, if there were some sort of, I don't know, some department within the police force that are specifically trained with to deal with people suffering from mental health issues,
Mhm.
that have the appropriate skills and for like you said about de-escalation, that so that
Mhm.
nothing, so that we don't have this terrible situation.
We don't have these fatal
The
mistakes.
misinterpretation, yeah, misinterpretation of signs, misinterpretation of signals, and
Mhm.
meaning, and one thing leads to another. Before you know where you are, someone's been shot.
Yes.
And if there were professionals on hand within the police force that could travel out and deal with these people
Mhm.
in a more in a,
More
in
humane,
a more
more humane
sensitive
way.
manner,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, I mean, they could even, I don't know if it'd be possible for them to accompany police uh,
absolutely.
once they're out and about. It would also, from my point of view as well, having people like that around it could hopefully build up a stronger relationship between the community and the police. Because
Yes.
I just, I just feel terrible knowing that the more these things happen, the more mistrust is going to exist between the civilian population and the police, and they're not going to feel that they can depend. People are gonna, they'll think, oh, there's an intruder. I don't want to call the police in case the police shoot me. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well,
because it,
hold that thought. Hold that thought, because we do have some video clips of, for, healthcare workers and first responders. So let me play those, and because that's directly to the point you're making now. So let me play this one from a nurse.
When I say all cops are bad, it's because I work with them. It's because I work with them enough to know that the good cops are so few and far between, that the shit like Sonia Massey's case is so unsurprising to me, so deeply unsurprising to me, and yet still made me physically ill when I watched that video. Sonia called the cops herself because she thought there was an intruder at her home. They then went to her home, started questioning her, entered her home, were suspicious of her. Mind you, she had called them, asked her for her identification, and then when they noticed that she was in the middle of cooking dinner with a pot of boiling water on the stove to make pasta, they said, hey, can you go attend to that pot of boiling water? And then when she did that, they 6 times. They fired 6 times into her head. As a nurse, when I say that racism is a public health crisis, I fucking mean it. And when I say racism is a public health crisis and a lot of the perpetrators are other healthcare workers, I fucking mean it. Because the amount of healthcare workers that I genuinely don't think even understand that there's an issue with our policing system in this country is so upsetting. But it's the truth. They fired at her 6 times over a pot of boiling water that they asked her to attend to. Her last words were, "I'm sorry." She ducked and said, "I'm sorry." I will never forget that. The whole thing is on video. And then none of the cops held the guy who killed her accountable. He stopped his partner from offering her assistance. His partner gave up. Not that it would have mattered, because 6 rounds into someone's head, beyond assistance. When I say it's all cops, I mean it. I mean it. Because we allow the most untrained, unbelievably violent and racist human beings and bigoted human beings to become law enforcement in this country.
So before I play the other 2 clips, I just want people to know that these are individuals that went on social media after Sonia Massey's murder, and these are their feelings. This has not been edited by us in any way, shape, or form, but these are their reactions to what has happened. So that was a nurse. This next clip is from a female police officer, and then I will play the clip from a male police officer.
Woman cop here. I just want to talk about Sonia Massey. I've been in law enforcement 7 years and I have seen a lot of fucking bullshit. And I'm telling you right now, that video of that officer unaliving that poor woman is fucking disgusting. As a cop, I am completely disgusted with not only my duty and my profession right now, but all my other law enforcement officers who are refusing to speak out against this. I mean, this goes beyond a law enforcement. This goes to a humanity factor. This officer went into the situation wanting to kill someone. Why are there not more officers speaking out against this? That is not what I signed up to do this job for. And any cop that does not speak out against this is just as guilty. In fact, we should be the first ones speaking out against our own people that are doing this stuff. This is murder. Yeah, it's murder. When I signed up to be a law enforcement officer, it was to protect and serve my community. It was to get to know my community. It was to help my community, to better my community, to make sure my people were safe. That's why I signed up. So you're telling me right now that a pot of boiling water is a threat to you? That's I cannot fathom. Because again, this wasn't about a woman with a pot, was it? This was a race-related issue. I'm absolutely disgusted. I'm so sorry. Sonia Massey deserved better, and I will say her name. Justice for Sonia Massey. We failed you. As law enforcement, we absolutely failed you. We failed your family. We just failed. Some days I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to be a part of this system. Because I care about people and I want to help people. I do not want to harm anyone. And if you go into this profession with some idea of grandeur, like you want to be a hero, you don't need to be here. And now all the work that us good officers do to try to bring our community together to make them not fear us, well, guess what? It's all gone because of that asshole. And I'm not going to say his name because I'm not going to make him famous. He's nobody. He's dirt underneath my boot.
Some of y'all have tagged me and some of you have messaged me for my take on the incident that happened in Springfield, Illinois. And my take is this. Miss Sonia Massey had some things going on. That night it appeared Miss Massey needed help, but instead Miss Massey was murdered. That's my short take on it. Cut and dry. She was murdered by a thug that had a badge and gun and an evil spirit. The longer version is I watched this video. I had to rewatch it to make sure I saw what I thought I saw the first time, and it really bothered me, as I know it bothered you if you've seen it. I fast forwarded to the part right before he shot, put my ear to the phone, closed my eyes. For some reason, I think I can hear better when I do that, to make sure I heard the back and forth like I thought I did. Let's rewind. First off, the guy that shot her was already a little ticked over asking her for her license, and she couldn't find it. First off, she didn't have to give him her license. She was in her home. In her home. There was no reason for her to give him her license. Fast forward, pot of water. His partner is the one that told her to go around there and get it. He's standing pretty close. Situational awareness. He backs up and moves off to the side, kind of chuckling about it. He didn't fear her, but he wasn't taking any chances at all. Completely understandable. She asks, "Where are you going?" He says, "Away from your hot, steaming water." Then she says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." But she's not talking to that guy. She's looking at the guy that ends up shooting her. He says, "Huh?" She says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." This sets him off. I rewatched it. I listened. I rewatched it over and over. She is not trying to close the gap on him. She is not drawing back to throw the hot water on him. He goes off at being rebuked. I believe this wholeheartedly. Y'all can make fun of me if you want to. I believe this. What does he say? "You better effing not, or I swear to God, I will shoot you in the effing face." At which point, she's scared to death. Pot goes on the counter. Nothing in her hand. She cowers down, understandably. He saw her put the pot down. He keeps saying, "Drop the pot, drop the pot, drop the pot." She starts peeking back up. What does he do? Still nothing in her hands. Pot still on the counter. He follows through what he told her he was going to do. He shot her in the effing face. Murdered her. During the aftermath, does not administer aid, discourages his partner from administering aid, says on the radio, "Yeah, she's still breathing, but she's losing a lot of blood." No remorse, nothing. This guy should have never been in law enforcement, and he deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. Law enforcement failed Miss Massey that night. She needed help, but she got murdered instead. That's my take, guys. God bless.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack with those videos and those clips from the officers and from the nurse. And I wanted to play those specifically because they are obviously they are white. They are not people of color. They are not part of um, the victims here. And so I felt it important to play what their what their take was, what they saw on the video, and those were all accurate accounts from what I also witnessed from watching the video. Um, Jay, I guess I turn over forward over to you. What are your reactions to um, what they had to say in those videos? I guess in their take on social that they put on social.
Of course, it's good to see law enforcement officers coming forward and denouncing exactly what happened, and seeing them disgusted and totally against what they both qualify as murder, quite rightly. It's the nurse at the beginning was just clearly finding the whole thing very difficult to stomach, very difficult to deal with.
Sure.
And branding all police officers as bigots and bad people is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, naturally.
Sure.
And she's obviously through her career and experience has had some terrible experiences. Nonetheless, as in any massive institution, organization, there are going to be rotten apples, and there are going to be people who let the team down. Obviously, somewhere along the line there, the very big question is what's going wrong in the recruitment process. Why are people being awarded the badge? Why are people being awarded a badge which in the US comes with a gun, which comes with the power of life and death? I mean, there's clearly very serious questions raised here about the type of processes which are involved in actually the selection processes in giving people a gun, which need to be reviewed, because this was, I mean, there's other instances of shootings in the US where the scenes move very quickly. People say they claim to have seen them holding a gun, and maybe it did look like they were holding something. Maybe the police officer reacted too quickly and it was wrong. A terrible thing to have happened. In this case, there was no doubting anything. In this case, it was, as those police officers said, it was just out and out murder. And yes, a race issue. In many cases, I'm sure I'm sure it is a race issue. Interesting in many ways, it's been a race issue as well. I know you said you're looking at those three from three white people's opinion on social media, and despite the fact, as you said a moment ago, they're not, but the white people aren't essentially part of the victim. I think they're not people of color. That's true, but in that moment, watching that video, all of them felt like a victim because of the aggression, the senseless aggression exposed by that police officer. And I think everyone, regardless of color, can side with the victim and feel like a victim in that case.
That is true. That is true. I want to mention something too, where I think the male officer laid out the process of how you would when he was talking. I kind of felt like I was in his shoes as an officer about how he would have how you step by step go through that situation. Um, Also, to point out, the officer that shot and killed Sonia Massey did not turn on his body armor camera. The footage is from the body armor camera of his partner, who turned it on from the beginning when they showed up at the house. So that's also an interesting point. Um, for a minute, for discussion's sake, let's forget about the gender and race of the officer that shot Sonia Massey. Let's forget about that. And this, I want to share some information. You talked about the recruitment process, right? So I want to share this. Um, if you are recruiting someone for a position, okay, and even in for or law enforcement, if they have 2 DUI convictions while serving in the military, mind you, they enlisted in the military in 2014. They had 2 DUI convictions, one in 2015, one in 2016. They received a general discharge under honorable conditions. Excuse me. That reason was because it was a civilian that gave them the DUI. Okay. Then you couple that with this person who you are recruiting to your law enforcement force. They have worked at 6 different police departments in 4 years. 3 of those positions were part-time, one of them was full-time, and then 2 of those positions were also at a sheriff's office. And just to let you know the difference between like local law enforcement or a sheriff's department, local law enforcement would be like the um, local city or town or a given district within a city. When it's a sheriff's office, that becomes a wider territory, like of a county that's then encompasses many different cities. So that jurisdiction, or if there's like on traveling between different cities, who has jurisdiction on the freeway, right, where you're driving, sheriff's offices really have jurisdiction there. So there's these things that are a bit disturbing for any candidate that you're looking to hire to your police force. Now, this same person who had those things, let me go full screen here. Um, there was reports obtained from public records that this particular candidate needed more training, including training under in high stress decision making classes. Um, failed that in November 2022 because there was a high speed pursuit where this particular candidate um, failed to make the stop. And then there were other reports, and this one is a bit disturbing as well. Um, there was a complaint from a female civilian who said that who admitted she was carrying drugs on her body. So this particular officer um, tried to force her to take the drugs out of her body cavity and in front of himself and another male officer. She was taken to the hospital where they were removing the drugs, and this particular officer burst through the curtain in order to see the procedure. That was the report of the complaint. Then this particular officer left that for he resigned before that investigation was complete. So I shared those reports because you talked about the recruitment process, right? If you are recruiting a someone to be on your police force in your law enforcement department, you want to find someone who will protect and serve those civilians. Based on what I just shared, would that be a good candidate for protecting and serving your citizens, regardless of race, regardless of nationality, regardless of country? just sharing those things. And again, I'm not in the law enforcement, you're not in law enforcement, but in the recruiting process, would you recruit someone with those red? What's that?
Red flags would be instantly raised with that type of track record. I mean, it wouldn't matter what type of job you're going for. I mean, if that information is of it should be available, but
Public record,
especially,
yes. It's public
yeah.
record.
So, I mean, it's beyond me that any public service institution would contemplate hiring this person. I mean, it's just red flags left, right, and center.
And thank you for making the point that it doesn't matter what profession, right? We could look at any profession that those reports are going to cause red flags no matter what. But
No,
they're
absolutely.
deeper red flags if the profession is for protecting and serving citizens.
But then where's it gone wrong? Where has it actually gone wrong? Are they struggling to find people to join the police force? Do they need to make up numbers rapidly? What's the reason that they either he's slipped through the net, and that can happen, or they perhaps they do need to make numbers and they're taking what offers they can. I don't know how it's. I know it's organized in the US because law enforcement isn't a centralized. It's not a centralized body in the US, is it?
No,
Very
no.
different.
Yeah, very private. And that's a great question, right? So why don't we take a break here on that question? Yeah, where does the process go wrong? And we'll come back and we will tackle that question and dive in a little bit more to some statistics and some of the mindset of what we're talking about. So stay tuned, folks. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Hey, folks, welcome back to this latest episode of Move the Needle, where Jay and I are having the difficult discussion about the police shootings and gun violence and where does that we left off. We went to break with kind of having the question of where are we going wrong, maybe even in the recruitment process, right? It's and so Jay, we talked about this a little bit before recording episode, but a lot of ex-military personnel become law enforcement once their term of service in the military is over. So and I may get pushback for this comment. I don't know, but I can only imagine it is a very difficult thing. Well, first of all, you have to be of a certain mindset when you're joining the military, like right out of high school, right at 18, 19, 20 years old. If you are excited or that's your goal to be in service, in military service, thank you for your service. But there comes a certain programming that comes along with being in the service. And this might be oversimplifying it, but you are being trained as a killer. You are being trained as a killer. So you do your military service. Hopefully, you don't have to go in any wars and be in any situations that require you to use your training as a killer. But okay, your military service is done, and you are now trying to assimilate into civilian life. Again, I said many police officers and law enforcement officers come from military backgrounds. I can only imagine the difficulty in assimilating into civilian life, and how how are we failing these folks without helping them deprogram, right? If there's a certain mentality that you have when you're in the military and you're on the front lines and you're in situations where it's life or death, and that is your training, life or death, and it's not going to be me, it's going to be the other person. Then you're in civilian life and you're in law enforcement, and I can very easily see where that mentality stays with you as a law enforcement officer. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that's what it should be. I can easily see where that mentality stays with you. And so, oh, go ahead. Sorry. What do you?
It is. I do think it's a very important point,
Mhm.
and I can imagine that a lot of ex-military personnel would quite naturally sort of migrate into police roles or security roles of some sort.
Sure.
It
Absolutely.
might seem, for many people, it might seem like quite a natural next step.
Mhm.
Uh, there are two things though, which I was thinking about it when we talked about this earlier.
Sure.
And one thing I actually read up a little bit about was that um, when I was reading about the British Armed Services,
Mhm.
I was quite surprised. Well, I should not have been so surprised, but I was too surprised to see that they spend a huge amount of training on de-escalation, because the military itself obviously finds themselves in incredibly stressful, difficult scenarios,
Mhm.
and the best way out is via non-military, the non-military option.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I show in most cases, you don't want to end up in a shootout with the opponent. So they it was this article was really expressing the the huge amount of training which they put them through to de-escalate situations, to exit a situation uh, as peacefully as possible.
Mhm.
And that got me thinking, well, it would be interesting if we could learn of these shootings which occur in the US, how many are actually from ex-military personnel or not,
Sure.
and could the ex-military personnel be beneficial to the police forces by by helping with their knowledge of the military de-escalation in more civilian scenarios and situations.
Absolutely.
Um, it's just two things that occurred to me was after we'd previously talked about this,
Mhm.
and clearly the whole training, knowledge, and process of de-escalation is fundamental here, and being able to make the decisions with a car.
And you said that about the amount of time they spend on de-escalation tactics and knowledge and learning. I think that's probably, I don't know, I haven't dug into the numbers enough yet here in the States, but I wonder if enough time is spent, right? Again, if we're talking about a background where this is ingrained in you, is 3 weekends of a 1-hour class on de-escalation, is that enough? Or is a quarterly class, like what is a good amount for really deprogramming escalation tactics, right? Life or death, it's either you or me, or replacing that programming with de-escalation. My job is to keep everyone alive at all costs if possible. That's really where we're talking about. Um, I think we will probably have to dive into that to bring that up, on another episode for sure. The one thing I also wanted to share. Oh, go ahead. You had another thought. Sorry.
No, I did. I suppose again, coming from my view over here, I really I feel for the for US law enforcement officers to a certain extent, that if I was living in a society where there is such a plethora of weaponry all around me, and I was entering into a situation where there's this, it's nearly a given that the other person is going to be carrying a gun, I would feel scared for my life. I would feel petrified.
Yeah.
And okay, if the police are going to carry guns, fine. But if the rest of the society wasn't carrying a gun, if there were stricter controls, if the US, if you only had a fifth of the gun quantity around, then the police themselves wouldn't be entering a situation with that high, with already that high level of anxiety, the fear, heart beating, and potentially fearing for their own safety every time they're entering a situation. And this would inevitably reduce all of those shootings.
Absolutely. Point well made. I can only imagine. Yeah. I can only imagine that what you're saying is true, right? I can imagine they feel like they're going into a war zone. And so you add that on to the background that we've mentioned they might be coming from. That's just it's almost a recipe for what continues to happen. That's really what it is. But want to share some other things here. A lot of times when there are police shootings and the fatal shootings, the argument here in the States is that, well, statistically, a white person is going to be shot and killed more often than a black person or a person of color. So I have some statistics, can't say that word, but I have some things to show. And okay, let's dive into it. So yes, that is true. That statistically speaking, a white person is typically going to be shot and killed more than a person of color or a black person. They try to break this down a little bit. I also have the link to where I found the statistics. You can fact check it for yourself. And I tried to write the numbers in here just for our argument's sake. So this was 2020. This was 459 white people that were shot and killed by police officers, compared to 243 for black people. Come to 2023, it was 425 white people and 229 black people. These statistics for 2024, they were as of May 27th, as you see right here. So the number, again, is more white people, 159 to 98 black people. I want to come back out here on camera for a second, because if you stop here, then yes, that statistical argument is correct. That why why is this such a racial issue, or why is it such a hotbed issue of race? You have to dig a little bit under the surface to understand why it's it's such an outrage when it's a person of color. So these statistics here start taking the population into account. So per 1 million people, 6.1 people who are black will be shot and killed, compared to per 1 million people, 2.4 white people will be shot and killed. That's a third less white people than black. Okay. Well, then look over here to the right. You have to take into account the amount of population. So this is 192 million white Americans and 40 million black Americans. I am not going to try to do the quick math on that, but that is significant in the demographic there. So if a black person is roughly 3 times likely to be shot and killed by a police officer, 3 times more likely than a white person, look at the difference in population. That's why it's such an outrage. Getting shot and killed 3 times as much, but the population difference is almost 80 million. So when we start talking about statistics, the argument that a white person is more likely to be shot and killed by a police officer, yes, there's truth to that, but you have to dive into the population numbers itself to see why that's so alarming. I just wanted to share that because on social media, so often there is that argument statistically. I've even had people try to use that against, or not use it, but use it in conversation with me, that, well, white people get shot way more than black people. Okay.
Well, we've had the same sort of thing in the UK, with people saying that if you look at the numbers, white people, there are more white people that are stopped and searched by police than black people. And again, it's true. More white people are stopped and searched than black people. However, when you actually say per 1,000 of population, it turns out that per 1,000 of population, white people, 5.9 stopped and searched. Of the per 1,000 black people, 24.5. So
that's what we're talking about.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, nearly 5 times more is ridiculous. Thank God the UK police don't have guns. That's what I can say.
Yeah, we'd be sharing those statistics with you. Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's 5 times as much. That again, when you boil it down to the
information is from the UK government website, so it's freely available on the UK government-owned website. Yeah,
public record. Yeah, and that's what I guess that's the part we're trying to do too, right? We're calling attention to this, but also to educate, right? Because these are not statistics that are hidden. These are not buried somewhere. This is public record that you can find. And if you're willing to go a little bit deeper than just the first level of questioning, then you start finding the more alarming statistics of why race plays a part and why it's alarming that it's so much more. But I know one thing that we wanted to raise, one more thought, or one more thing that we wanted to raise in this episode. We were talking about how the gun violence and just being around, whether you've been a victim of gun violence or not, the correlation it has to suicide and the suicide risk. And this was kind of alarming as well. This is a link to an article that the study that we're talking about now. Um, but so there are direct, and the article talks about this. There are direct and indirect exposures to gun violence. So if you're hearing gunshots, or if you know someone who was a victim, um, it can lead to a lifetime of suicidal ideation and behavior. And this particular study was leaning more towards Black adults here in the U.S. Um, so the person who was creating the study is Daniel Semenza, and this is kind of what he said about the study: gun violence exposure, whether direct or living in the community where it happens, it has the implications for long-term stress and trauma. It does damage to the body and the body's most important systems, and that's physical damage. This stress causes physical damage over the long term. Um, One thing that this study pointed out, it's a new study, but it pointed out the demographics where uh, the indigenous people of North America, and or I would say the United States anyway, and white men still have higher suicide rates other than any other group. But between the years of 2018 and 2021, the suicide rate among Black and Latino people rose by 19% and 6%. And the more alarming part of this is that the highest increase was among ages 10 to 24 years old. That is an alarming statistic for sure. Um,
Wow.
so this study was about 3,000 people and ages Black adults ages 18 to 94, and the at the high risk, these people were at high risk of experiencing either multiple gun violence exposures, um, whether it's direct or indirect, and it increased their suicidal behaviors. So, for example, the suicidal behavior is this: 12% of the people in the study had experienced three or more types of gun violence exposure. Those who had been threatened or knew someone who had been shot and killed, they were more likely to have the suicidal ideations or have suicide attempts. And those who had been shot and survived reported making plans to take their life. So, uh, Semenza says that it's the cumulative effect and impact that's important to recognize here. So,
Yeah.
like, I think that's another important aspect of this whole conversation around gun violence. It's not just the recruitment and de-escalation tactics for the law enforcement, but what is the actual gun violence doing to citizens, right? Who are uh, not direct victims. But if you're living in an area where it may not even just be police shootings, but if you're hearing gunshots, if you know someone who was shot, that study, although it's new, is really taking into account the effect that it has psychologically, then physiologically, because that goes in the body does not know the difference between mental, physical, or emotional stress. The body knows stress or not stress. And all those things begin to wear on the physical systems of the body. So are we, like you said, at what point does a country look at how it's serving and protecting its population? And
Yeah.
yes, there's so many levels to the gun aspect of it, but
Hmm.
if there's less gun control laws, look at the long-term effect that it's having on citizens who are living in areas that have gunshots heard, or someone who's been shot. It's a health crisis. Yeah.
Well, it's natural that it would be. I mean, simply existing in an area where, as you say, where you hear gunshots, where you know that there is gun violence. Uh, although on one level you believe that it becomes normalized and you start existing with it because that just happens as a matter of day-to-day survival. And but that's only on your conscious level. Actually, in deeper than that is really really profoundly affecting you because you are in a heightened state of anxiety and fear, and you're existing in that. The knock-on effects on that on your physiological system are very profound. There was a 2013 study by Boston University where they actually saw that a 1% increase in gun ownership was mirrored by a 0.9% increase in gun-related deaths and murders. And when they looked across the different states of the US, they also realized that the states with the less restrictive laws had higher suicide rates. It's so
There's a so you can, yeah, you can, I'm gonna use a very college educated word, but you can extrapolate from the data. You can really surmise that there's a cause and effect, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And going back to our original topic of the gun violence and the police shootings, I would like to add to what we talked about with the suicide rates, or even the suicide ideation. Imagine again, if many of our law enforcement officers come from a military background. So imagine the stress that they are under in active duty if they
Mm,
are on those front lines, or even if they're not on front lines. But there's countless stories of many soldiers, getting hit with the IUDs, those devices. So the amount of stress you're under while in an active military zone, that stays with you even when you're not, when your service is done. And then
well,
that translates oh, go ahead, sorry.
I'm just thinking. What I'm realizing now that one bit of information that would have been useful right now, which we don't actually have, unfortunately, is some sort of statistic about uh, uh, police of uniformed police officers who
Mm,
commit suicide. Um, it
very
would
true.
it would I'm sure, as sad as it might sound, I'm sure it would be quite an alarming statistic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because again, that's a high, uh, for lack of a better term, high stress job, right? Like you are in it, as you said, if you know that the potential for every citizen out there is to have a gun,
Mm,
you try not to consciously think about that when you are interacting with the civilian, but your subconscious, it's going to be there. It's parked there. It's a fight
mhm.
or flight mode. So I would like to leave a final thought for our conversation, is that while it's easy to place blame on law enforcement, the the situation with Sonia Massey, that to me is fairly cut and dry. But in a general sense, a more broad term, it's easy to point fingers at, well, law enforcement is wrong or their recruitment process is wrong. But I would like to actually put out there that I think we're doing a deeper disservice to our military people, to our law enforcement uh, people, by not helping them actually be better first responders, or deal with the, as I said before, the deprogramming of having to be on high alert where it's fight or flight, and reprogramming so that they can be better at de-escalation and protecting and serving. I think we're doing them a disservice as well. And once that becomes a better service for them, they in turn can provide a better service for the civilians.
Yes, absolutely. Um, Absolutely. Or if there was a department within, like a mental health professional, mental health department within the police force. I'm only saying that because I'm also aware that the police have a lot on their plate. And if they were thinking, oh, what now? I've got to become a mental health professional on top of a police officer. It's like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
they've got a lot going on, and maybe who knows that, they will know the best way of organizing the force. But certainly, you're absolutely right that more support is needed, more investment, and unfortunately, it comes down to investment in the in those type of areas where de-escalation, mental health support, um, and also community work, building relations with between police and communities.
yes,
That's
absolutely.
all that needs to take place because unfortunately, from everything I've seen and I've read, the best option: get guns off the streets. Stop selling guns in the US. But that's just pipe dream. That's not gonna happen.
That isn't an ideal situation.
Yeah,
But until then, what we will continue to do is, at least Jay and I here with Move the Needle will continue to actually have the challenging conversations with many different perspectives to get people talking and thinking and then acting on what best serves our human interests.
definitely not guns.
No, not at all, not at all. But folks, we have appreciated you listening and watching um, this latest episode of Move the Needle. You can find us right there on the bottom. That's our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because once you subscribe, you get our latest content. And feel free to also leave comments. Let us know um, what you're thinking. Let us know, um, if we touched on something that is helpful to help move what's going on in your community as well. So until next time, Lee and Jay signing off for Move the Needle.
Bye bye.